I remember as a young child, one of my family members, an elderly lady, would beat me up with a piece of scripture that I did not understand and probably didn't want to hear. And until I really started studying several years ago, it was one of the scriptures I avoided because I felt guilty about it usually. In Matthew chapter 7, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says some things that we often lift out of context and, shall we say, whoop each other as Christians with, because it feels good when you say these things to somebody. Do not judge, so that you will not be judged. For in the way you judge, you will be judged. I have heard this verse lifted out of context so much. It's nauseating because it's used to pistol whip you, to keep you from looking at them, or to keep you from saying stuff about them. You say, who are them? Well, it could be anybody, but probably those who don't want to deal with their own issues. And so they yell at you, don't judge me, or you're going to be judged. And that's not what this is about, in all honesty. Jesus is saying, in the original language that he would have spoken, don't condemn, so that you will not be condemned. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to condemn someone? Well, when someone is condemned, there has been a sentence passed on them which deems their life worthless. Now, there are a lot of people you do not have to like, but they are still people with value. There are a lot of people that you may never want to associate with again, but they still have value. And they really have some value to you, or else you would commit murder. See, there's some polarities here that have to come together to understand the text. It's not a matter of judging in the sense of discerning someone's sin or someone's righteousness or someone's unrighteousness. It's a matter of our attitude towards that person. And when we get to the place where we would just as soon that person be dead, their life is worthless to us, we have condemned them. That's what it really says here. Yes, does it come from a judgmental attitude initially? Probably. But I've judged a lot of things through spiritual discernment to be what they are, and they are that. And you have too, probably. But do I take the person because the person has an issue of unrighteousness and deem them worthless to live? No. I think the ultimate picture of hate is that. I think the ultimate picture of murder is that. But to condemn someone for their sin is not your privilege. It's not my privilege. It's no one's privilege but God's. And in effect, God does not condemn you for your sin. God never has sent anyone to hell. We send ourselves by our choice of not accepting the redemptive act of Christ at Calvary. You say, well, I haven't made my mind up yet. Well, then you've rejected, because there is no other position. There is no neutral position regarding salvation of Christ. You either accept it, or the default is you have rejected it. For in the way that you condemn, you will be condemned, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Literally, the speck here is a piece of sawdust. And this scenario is the proverbial can't see the forest for the trees. We often are very good at looking at the irritant in someone else's life that irritates us, when in fact we have massive problems ourselves. Someone came to me in a counseling session and said, I'm glad that you're willing to work with my wife because she's the one with the problem. I don't know. That didn't go. That poor gentleman didn't realize the log in his own eye. And that in itself is sad, but still he has value. And so does his wife, who had that tiny little bit of sawdust in her eye. How can you say to your brother, let me take this speck out of your eye, and behold, the log is in your own eye? Jesus then calls it what it is. He says, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye. In other words, do some self-examination and look at your issues and see where they are in perspective to you, looking at your neighbor, your brother, your sister, your whoever, and picking them apart. You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you can see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. We don't like those verses, do we? Because it requires us to look at us. And that can be one of the most scariest images out there. That whole issue of looking at yourself as God could see you. Not a pretty picture unless you have been forgiven and cleansed by the blood of the Lamb. And then if that has happened, the love in your heart will more than likely ignore the speck in your brother's eye.